Hi guys, welcome to the second HarleQuest devlog video. I'd like to give you an update on what we've been working on recently, and in the last 3 months since that first video, quite a lot of things have happened, but a lot of them have been very technical and they've been to do with the tools rather than the content for the game. So I'm going to go over some of the more interesting aspects of that, just to give you an idea of what we've been doing. I've been taking a look at the cutscene system in the game. There's lots of different ways to do cutscenes in games, and I have, as ever, strong opinions about how I think that should work. In HarleQuest specifically, I'm a big supporter of in-game, in-engine, dynamic cutscenes that never take control away from the player any longer than they have to serve their purpose. The story should be largely something that the player experiences while they're playing, and not something that is told away to the side. Now, we will have cutscenes that fully cut away from gameplay briefly, but this will only happen in between the larger dungeon areas to give a bit of a breather between the intense action of playing the game. I'd like to go over the technical side a little bit here. To begin with, when I started making cutscenes, I wanted to try using Blender. Blender's a fantastic piece of software for 3D modelling and for animation, and for making animated films. But it doesn't have any knowledge of the game engine that we're building HarleQuest in. So for exporting our character animations, for example, or exporting the layouts of the rooms in the dungeons, that's all just a plugin for Blender. And I thought I could do the same thing for cutscenes. I thought I'd just make a cutscene in Blender, and then we'd make our plugin look at the cutscene data, export it, and then we'd have everything we need. But in practice, that was not going to happen. With Blender not knowing anything about our engine, let's say a character drops a key and you're supposed to go and pick up the key. Blender knows how to play the animation of the character walking, but it doesn't know how to drop the key. And I can add a feature in our plugin to say, okay, here we drop a key, but which key? What type of key? What does the key do after it's dropped? What data does that key have? It needs extra context. The more I looked at it, the more I realised we would be spending a lot of time adding bespoke, custom export features into our plugin for everything we wanted to do in our cutscenes. And this led me to think, well, what if we had an editor for HarleQuest cutscenes that was built from scratch to let us do exactly what we want to do? And the question is it worth moving the project schedule to have this feature? I spent hours and hours researching different ways of doing this. I looked into how would we do it just using Blender? How would we do it using a hybrid approach of part Blender, part custom code logic? I looked into integrating a scripting language so that we could script some of the cutscenes and use Blender for the rest of it. And after looking at all the possible approaches and trying to think about, over the lifespan of the project, what is the approach we want to have? What I ended up deciding on was, we do want the custom editor, we want to be able to define exactly the cutscenes we want to have, but we will still do character animations in Blender. 3D modeling and texturing will all still be done in Blender, but we pull those into our custom editor, and this custom editor is basically built into the engine. And that way, the way we arrange the cameras that move around, the items that get dropped, the doors that open, all of these interactive things can be done much more simply and in a way that just extends how the engine already works rather than requiring custom logic in the plugin. So I know that's a bit technical, but that was a turning point and a crossroads for our approach to our tools for the project. And it's actually gone in a really good direction and I'm really happy with it, so that's what I'd like to share with you now. So here's the HarleQuest editor. One of the first features we wanted to get working was the ability to hit a button and then immediately be able to drop into game. And the game works exactly as it normally would on the Windows build. And then at any time, you can pause the game again, and you can see all of the different objects in every room in this floor of dungeon. You can select an object, and you can look at all of its properties. All the properties are generated from the code, so you don't need to manually write these when you're working on it. There's still some usability tweaks that we want to make for some of these properties, but generally speaking, it's a pretty good system. Of course, the purpose of the editor is for cutscenes, so the way we're going to build out our cutscenes is using the sequencer. You go over to the sequencer, you can add a new empty clip into a sequence, and then for the selected object, you just press the I key and you can insert a keyframe. That works in a similar way to Blender. You move along the timeline, you move the object that you want to move, press I again, you insert another keyframe, and then now you can scrub along the timeline and see that motion. You can also press space and you can see the motion occur. So, in order to build cutscenes, a really important feature is the ability to create and control cameras. So, in the world, the default camera is the camera that is following the player around during gameplay, but you can select that camera and you can still manipulate it the same way as other things. If, for example, we choose to make a new animation here, we'll just create a new empty clip for the camera. We can add a keyframe. I have to select this first. We can add a keyframe, much the same as the goblin. We move it along the timeline, move the camera, add another keyframe. It can interpolate between the two, and again pressing space will play the animation. In the editor, you can go over to the viewport tab and then switch to active camera. Means that now the editor viewport will always be in the active camera for the cutscene. And so now we have dynamic cameras. Another really cool feature that we have in the editor is AngelScript integration. Here we have a very simple script that when the player enters the room, we print out a message to the console. But we can also do things like spawn enemies. If I change the code here to spawn the executioner, all we have to do is press one key and the script will run. It'll spawn the executioner in the world. This is really cool because it means that designers and level editors can make little tweaks to logic, or they can add their own little custom scenarios in particular parts of the dungeon, and I think it'll make the world and the cutscenes both a lot more dynamic. Our first goal with the new editor is to get that first opening cutscene in the dungeon up and running properly. And I think that's going to take a couple weeks yet, as we still add new features, fix bugs, and just generally refine the workflow with the editor. I'm looking forward to having a build that we can put out on the Dreamcast, send to you guys, and just check that it's working properly and see what you think. I'll be doing another devlog video very soon with an update to the schedule and roadmap, just so you guys know when everything's going to be landing. But until then, if you want to check out the Discord server, there's a link in the description to that. I'll be updating social media more often now too. Okay, see you guys next time. Cheers.